Hi, I'm Norm Abram. Welcome to the new Yankee Workshop. A few years ago, while we were in Georgia working on a This Old House project, we had occasion to visit several public and private places looking for local antiques that we could copy here in the workshop. One of our finds was a terrific-looking tiger maple washstand, probably made in the 19th century. They've evolved over the ages from a simple bucket of cold water to today's ultra-modern lavatories, so much desired in the chic bathrooms. Now the trend today is for a porcelain vessel on a flat table plumbed with hot and cold water. Not much different than this bowl and pitcher. They say what goes around comes around. Now this particular washstand from Savannah was quite elaborate, featuring turned legs, a drawer connecting them, which was large enough for bath sundries. So come on, there are legs to be turned, tiger maple veneer to be made, curlicues to be cut, drawers to be dovetailed, and precise mortise and tenon work to be accomplished. But the finished result is well worth the effort. We'll be off to Georgia next. Then we'll be back here to build a tiger maple washstand. That's next, right here on the New Yankee Workshop. Jackie and Stanley Levine are rare book dealers here in Savannah. They are also collectors of fine federal-style furniture. Now, they've graciously allowed me to come into their home and show you a piece I think you're really going to like, a tiger maple washstand. Now, the Levines have been collecting antiques for years, and it's obvious that they have a good eye. Now, in this back bedroom is the piece I want you to see. The washstand dates back to about 1830. The large hole was for the wash basin, the small hole for a jar of soap. There's a couple small drawers at the top, and a very elegant scroll work. Now the legs are turned out of cherry, and they pass right through an intermediate shelf, under which there is a small drawer. Now today you could put a lamp at the top and store some books down below. Now this piece reminds me of the past, but it functions well today. Boy, that's a noisy process. Now the first thing you have to do to build this washstand is to find some tiger maple. My supplier had plenty of it. I was surprised. He even let me pick through the pieces to find the nicest looking stock. You'll also need some common maple for the turnings. Take that material, the design of the wonderful washstand we found at the Levines in Savannah, and a couple days in a well-equipped shop, and this is what you get. Now, if you'd like to build one of these, a measure drawing is available with the materials list, and you'll hear more about that before the program ends. Now, before we get back to the power tools, let's take a moment to talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. Now our project is made up of very thin pieces of material. The stock that I bought is 8/4 stock. So now I'm resawing it into thinner pieces. The best tool to do that is my resaw, which is equipped with a wide 3-inch blade with very aggressive teeth, a nice high rip fence, cuts through it like butter. I'm not sure if the boards on the antique original were planed to thickness and smoothness by hand or with a machine, but we're going to use a machine. This is my 13-inch surface planer. It has a big cutter head with 3 knives in it and an automatic feed which runs the boards through. A couple passes on each side, I'll have the right thickness and it'll be perfectly smooth. For the last few minutes, I've been spending some time setting up the orientation of some boards which will become the middle and top shelves of our washstand. What I actually did is I was careful to keep track of the pieces. This was the full thickness that I did the resawing on and then planing. If I keep them in the same orientation, when I open them up, I get what's known as a book match, like the pages of a book. The wilder grain is in the middle, the finer grain is out towards the edges. Now this isn't enough for my blank, so I've had to add one more piece, and I carefully picked a piece with similar grain. Now the edges are still rough, so we'll run those through the joiner. To help align the boards when I glue them up and to reinforce the joint, I'm going to cut some slots for these beechwood biscuits. I'll use my plate joiner. This one happens to be a cordless model. It works great. Inch and an eighth. Now for the last few minutes I've taken a blank of maple that's 1 3/4 inches square, mounted it in the lathe, and rounded the sections that are to be turned, leaving the other sections square. Now using a sketch that I made of the original, I'm laying out all the transitions for the various aspects of the turning. Now we'll just transfer the marks around. Okay, now we'll take a skew chisel and start to form the details. Now a different tool, I'm going to use my gouge to start rounding over various areas. The next operation to perform on these legs is to make the mortises to receive the tenons from the rails. I've laid out the location of the mortise, and I'm using my dedicated hollow chisel mortiser. The steps for setup are to install a 1/4 inch bit with the 1/4 inch chisel, adjust the fence to position the mortise, and set the depth for 1 inch. Now these pieces will become the rails for the washstand. They're cut to the correct length and width, and now I need to form tenons on each end to fit into those mortises that I just made. So I've set up a stop block with the right distance from the blade and adjusted the height to 1/4 inch. I'll make the shoulder cuts first. Now without changing any of my setup, I'm going to nibble away the top and bottom of each tenon. To complete the tenons, I turn to my tenoning jig. It holds the rails in a vertical position so I can safely push them through, making the cheek cuts. Now's a good time to make some grooves in the rails. So I've set up my stacked dado head cutter for a 3/8 inch width and a 1/4 inch depth. These grooves will receive blocks to support the top and the draw. Well, now I'm ready to start working on the top. So I've taken the piece we glued up earlier out of the clamps, and I'm just sanding it all smooth. Well, let's take another look at the prototype. I'm getting ready to form this top assembly. The countertop needs a groove, and the backsplash needs a groove to receive the side splash. I'll make those at the router station. I've installed a 3/8 inch straight cutting bit in my router, set the height for 1/8 inch, and transferred some marks for the leading and trailing edges of the bit. I've also marked the blank where I want the groove to stop. For one groove, I can start right in at the edge, run it through until the mark reaches the leading edge. For the other side, I'm going to have to drop the blank over the bit at the trailing edge and then finish it off. The procedure to make the grooves in the backsplash is the same, except I'm going to use a miter guide to help guide the piece through. We've just made a little notch in the side splash, and that's to conceal the end of the groove. And one more little notch to conceal the groove in the backsplash. Here I'm laying out the scroll work that I took from some patterns of the antique original. My scroll saw is perfect for cutting out the pattern. The small blade gives me a nice smooth cut. It makes it easy to go around the tight radius and to get into the small corners. This one even has a blower to keep the sawdust out of the way and a light so that I can see the line clearly. Well, now for a little bit of assembly. First, I'm going to attach the backsplash to the top with a little bit of glue and some 1-inch brads. Now, where the side splash meets the backsplash, I can glue the joint. But where the side splash meets the top, because we have cross grain in that situation, I'm just going to use some glue in the middle. That'll secure the piece, and the free area will allow it to expand and contract with changes in humidity. Before I quit tonight, I want to cut a couple pieces of the substructure of this upper assembly. There's 2 pieces of plywood, one at the top and one at the bottom, with the arch cut out of it that will support the maple and also guide the draws. First thing I want to do is cut the arch at the bandsaw. Well, good morning. I thought I'd get started today by doing the next step on the legs. When I looked at the antique original, I noticed that even though the turning was common maple, they actually wrapped the square section with some tiger maple. So what I've done is ripped some thin strips of the tiger maple, and I'm just going to glue them to the square portions. Now I'll just center them on the piece, letting the excess hang over the edges. Now I'll just clamp them all up, let them set for about an hour, trim them off, and laminate the other side. Now let's get back to work on the sub-assembly. These are the 2 pieces that I cut last night with the curve. Now I've made some vertical partitions which are going to enclose the draw. They're attached with some glue and some 1-inch brads. These little blocks will help support the outer shell. Now I have to wrap this sub-assembly with some tiger maple. The first thing I'm going to do is put a little face frame around the drawer opening. Here's a thin piece of tiger maple that I've soaked for about a half hour to make it more flexible and pliable. I hope it doesn't break. Now the first step is that I've got to dry fit it. I've got to bend it in here so that I can cut it to the correct length. All right, that's pretty good. Now we'll just mark it and cut it. With the piece cut to length, I can now glue it in place. And I'm just going to put a dab of glue at the center of my little stud blocks. Now, the piece actually swelled up when I soaked it. I had cut it to the correct width. Now it's about 1/8 of an inch wider. So I'm going to still keep it centered, and when it cures, it should come right back to the right height. Ah, success. Okay, now this is the top lid, and I'll sweeten up that cut at the drum sander. So meanwhile, back at the legs, I'm trimming that first lamination flush using my laminate trimmer and a flush trimming bit. Once that's done, I'll laminate the adjacent side. Now I suppose that I could have made the legs entirely out of the tiger maple, but on the original antique, it gave it sort of a special effect doing it this way. Well, now we're ready to build a couple little drawers. And they couldn't be simpler. Rabbited front, 1/4-inch plywood sides and back, and a groove for the bottom. Let's rabbet the front first. I've changed my setup by adding a stop block and readjusting the fence to make a dado in the side pieces to receive the back. And now I'll run a groove in the sides and the front for the bottom. Just a 1/4-inch hole in the drawer front is necessary for the wooden knob. Now to put them together, just a little bit of glue and some brads. These drawers are so small, I have no idea what you put in them, but they were in the original. These triangular blocks are going to be used to secure the top. Now I'm rabbiting out the edges so that they can fit into the groove that I made in the rail earlier. With these sides dry, I can now trim these faces. With the leg remounted in the lathe, I can trim the top area of the lamination and complete the turning. Now with all the pieces sanded, I'm going to dry fit them together so that I can size the middle shelf and notch it around the legs. Now here's my middle shelf with the good side facing up, and I have each corner laid out for the cutout around the leg. Now using the table saw I will get an overcut on the underside, but you never see that. There is a sequence to making these cuts. I don't want the block to get wedged between the fence and the blade, so I start with the fence closest to the saw blade for the first cut. Now I'll move the fence away from the blade for the second cut, and you can see that the block is going to fall away from the blade. Okay, that fits pretty good. Let's glue it up. I notched the corner blocks at the bandsaw so that they would fit around the legs. And now I just glue them in place. This next piece of pine is a cleat which will allow me to secure the mid-shelf, and it will also act as a guide for the top of the drawer so it won't tip out as I open it. A little bit of glue to hold the cleat and a couple screws to secure the top. These pieces will make up the draw support system. This piece that's been notched and rabbeted is the draw support, and this smaller piece is the side guide for the draw. Here's how it fits in place. Just glued and tapped over tight against the leg. Now I'm ready to build that middle drawer. This first dado is to receive the back. I'm going to join the sides of the drawer to the front with dovetails. Here I've set up my dovetailing jig. First thing to do is cut the tails in the side pieces. Well, I've flipped the fingers of the jig over, installed the drawer front at the top of the jig, and now I can cut out the pins. This dovetail joint that I just milled is really not necessary for strength. It's not likely that enough force will be put on this drawer front to pull it loose, but it sure is a beautiful joint. The plywood bottom just floats. I'll secure it with a few brads along the back. The next thing to do is to complete the corners of the middle shelf. The original had small pieces of maple that were just fitted, mitered at the corner, and glued in place. Now these holes that I'm drilling through the corner blocks will be to secure the top, and I'm elongating them to allow for expansion. And the top is secured to the base with a few screws. And with this part of the job done, we can turn our attention to finishing this piece. Well, here's what our tiger maple washstand looks like with one coat of golden oak stain and one coat of semi-gloss polyurethane. And I really like what it's done to this tiger maple. It has brought out the character of the grain. Some of the surfaces are satin smooth, like the drawer front and the legs, but the horizontal surfaces still seem to be a little bit rough. And after all, these are the surfaces that are going to take the most wear. So I want to add one more coat. Before I can do that, I have to give a light sanding with some 220 grit paper. Now it might seem odd when you're sanding this tiger maple because the grain of the wood is actually running this way, but the tiger features run this way. And that's not sanding against the grain, this is sanding with the grain. I like to use these foam brushes when I apply the polyurethane. They hold plenty of material and they give me a nice smooth finish. The stain and polyurethane really bring out the character of the tiger maple. Now this was an interesting project to build. It'll be interesting to see how it works as a bedside table. Now next time, another antique from the low country of Georgia. This is called a dough box. Bread dough would be stored in boxes like these and allowed to rise. Now the antique that we saw was being used by its owner to store fine linens. I'll show you how to build one next time right here on the New Yankee Workshop.